Greetings chess friends, Robbie again, and I have a wonderful game here that was posted on chess.com as part of a video series by Grandmaster Eugene Perelshteyn. I hope I have expressed the Grandmaster's name correctly. And of course we're going to look at it from the perspective of square strategy theory. Now, the Grandmaster himself states that he likes to play on the dark squares. And of course from the perspective of black and from the perspective of square strategy theory, that of course means setting up what we know as the E5 area. And we will seek to defend and occupy these dark squares. And of course we will seek to attack these light squares on the E4 area. If we can just, for example, make these moves here, just by way of explanation of what this means in the context of square strategy theory. Here we can see our area. White has positional weaknesses here on F4 and D4, and pawn weaknesses here at the base of the E4 area and on these inner squares here, especially this square here, F2. So our strategy of course is to occupy, as we have said, the E5 area, the E5 area, and to attack the E4 area. And this game highlights all the wonderful concepts we have looked at up until this point. So in the actual game, the game began with the move D4, and immediately our Grandmaster occupies the dark squares and attacks the light squares with the move Knight F6, preventing an immediate E4. White plays C4, and of course we're interested in setting up our dark squared area. Therefore the Grandmaster plays the move G6, going to fianchetto this bishop here, where it will exert some influence on these dark squares. Knight C3 was played, bishop G7, E4. Of course we're seeking to defend this area. We want to prevent, of course, incursions into this area, and the Grandmaster of course played the move D6. Bishop E2 was played by White. And here the Grandmaster played it's truly a wonderful move. Now remember, we're seeking to control and defend this area here, and the Grandmaster played the surprising move Knight to A6, where it controls these dark squares here on the queen side. I think it's just a phenomenal move, because if ever D5 was played, this knight finds a home on C5, where it occupies a dark square and of course attacks these light squares in perfect harmony with our dark square strategy. White played Knight F3, Grandmaster castled, White castled, and our Grandmaster set up the pinnacle of dark square strategy, a pawn on E5. And here White advanced the pawn to D5, and we can see the control that we have over the dark squares is truly wonderful. Grandmaster of course played knight c5, occupying the dark squares and attacking this pawn here at e4, which has only one defender. Now suppose we can just take a minute to look at our opponent's area. We have stated that it is our strategy to occupy the dark squares. Of course all our pieces are doing that, as well as our pawns, and to attack the e4 area, the light squares. And we can see that of course at the base this is particularly weak, being defended only by the queen. This of course is weak, being defended only by the king. So we have very good chances against the e4 area. Of course white had to defend this pawn with the move queen c2. And here the Grandmaster played another excellent move, a5, preventing an incursion into our territory, occupying of course another dark square. b3 was played, and we always want to take note of pawn moves like this, because we know that the weakness of a particular area is determined by whether, of course, the squares can be defended by pawns. And what this move does, of course, it strengthens the light squares, but it also weakens these inner dark squares. It is not of any real consequence at the moment, but it's always good to take note of pawn moves like this, because they certainly strengthen one complex while weakening that of another. And here the Grandmaster played bishop to d7, perhaps with ideas of playing a4 and of course weakening these light squares on the queen side. Bishop e3 was played, and the Grandmaster coolly played the move b6, cementing this knight in here on c5. So if ever the bishop took, a Grandmaster has options of whether to take with the d pawn or the b pawn. But we can see the setup. All the pieces and pawns on dark squares. It's an excellent dark squares strategy. And here white played the move a3. Again, ask yourself what this pawn move does. And we can readily see that although it aims to take control of dark squares, it weakens the e4 complex at its base. And the Grandmaster stated in his commentary that he had the plan of advancing this pawn to a4 and forcing this pawn here to either advance, where of course it would weaken these light squares, or to accept an isolated a pawn. And of course we have seen examples of that in our previous videos on how to create a weak colour complex. And this is a wonderful example of that. But prior to that, Grandmaster played the move knight to g4, challenging this bishop here, which is of course important for our domination of the dark squares, trying to create some imbalance. Bishop g5, attacking the queen, of course. Grandmaster coolly played f6, strengthening the entire e5 colour complex. Bishop went to d2. Here Grandmaster continued with his plan. a4, a brilliant positional move, seeking to create a weak colour complex on these light squares on the queen side. So rather than accept a weakened and isolated a pawn, his opponent played the move b4. And we can see how weak this complex has actually become. You can probably guess the move. Knight to b3, occupying this weak colour complex. Rook a to b1. Now we know, of course, that with regard to square strategy theory, we are seeking to occupy the squares of one colour and to attack the squares of the opposite colour. In this instance, the e4 area. Here the Grandmaster played the excellent f5, seeking to attack in a tactical way the e4 area. Bishop g5 was played, the knight came back to f6, and this is a positionally disastrous move. Not only when it was initially played did it give up control of this weak colour complex here, it is now giving up control of these dark squares here. The Grandmaster immediately uses this, of course, as an outpost for his knight and plays the move knight c5. Knight d2 was played. h6, putting the question to the bishop. This, of course, is the only square in our territory which is actively controlled, the only dark square in our territory which white has some control over. Not anymore. Bishop goes back. And now try to guess the move. Move of course, f4. And this bishop has no choice but to exchange itself. And we will have complete control over the dark squares because of the absence of this dark square bishop. Bishop takes, d takes c5. And here white won a pawn, but it's absolutely inconsequential because of black's domination of the dark squares. This knight is not even in play. This pawn here, of course, is backwards and fairly weak. And let us take a moment just to look at the respective areas now. We can see that the e4 area is still particularly weak. Pawn here being defended only by the king. There is also weakness now on these dark squares, especially this square here at h2, itself of course being defended only by the king. So of course our strategy somewhat changes. We're now attacking on the king side. It is of course an e5 strategy in the direction of f4, and we're seeking to dominate this colour complex here against this pawn here on h2. g5 was played. Of course, the plan is to go g4 and eventually g3 if we are allowed, seeking to occupy this dark square colour complex. And f3 was played. Now again, when we see a pawn move by our opponent, we realise that it of course has strengthened the e4 area, but it has also now weakened these dark squares. Grandmaster continues with his plan to play g4, and of course if permitted to enter here on g3. Rook a1 was played, h5, knight c3, knight h7. This is a brilliant move. Look how the queen takes advantage of these weakened dark squares. She of course wants to come up here to h4, and if black is permitted he will play, of course, g3 and with mate on h2. Queen d1 was played, queen h4, attacking this dark square, weak dark square colour complex. F takes g4. Now if we go back a minute, if of course white had attempted something like h3, well, we'd have simply have went g3, and of course we're familiar with this plan of sacrificing the bishop. G takes h3, and there's no way that white could have stopped checkmate. And of course we're familiar with that little plan because of exercises we have done previously. So the actual move that was played was, whoops, f takes g4, f takes g4. Black of course is seeking to play g3 and attack this weak complex here. Queen e1. Again, we have a colour complex that we are trying to infiltrate. We are no interest in a queen trade. Queen g5. King h1 was played. And now the brilliant rook f6. Seeking to bring the rook here to the h file, but of course it puts pressure on this dark square colour complex. Rook a2, perhaps seeking to have some influence along the 7th or the 2nd rank. Rook h6, continuing with his plan of dominating the dark square colour complex. g3, this is an interesting moment. Again, it's a pawn move, and we should take stock of pawn moves because they weaken one complex while strengthening another. And here we can see that this entire light square complex has become weak. We therefore change our strategy slightly. We're simply going to occupy these light squares and attack these dark squares. Rook h3, occupying the weak colour complex. Rook to g1, and now the f3 pawn becomes an absolute monster, occupying the weak colour complex. And it's virtually impossible for white to avoid checkmate. And in the game he played the sacrifice, bishop takes f3, trying to stave off the attack. Rook f8 was played, bishop to d1, which of course is a blunder. And I wonder if you can find the winning move. Remember, we're seeking to occupy this weak colour complex here and to attack the opposite colour. Of course the move is rook takes h2, king takes h2, queen to h6, king to g2, and queen h3, checkmate. I really love this game. It's just a wonderful example of excellent positional chess, of seeking to set up a colour complex in one's own area, and of course seeking to dominate colour complex in one's opponent's area. And we've saw, of course, techniques that we have seen before with regard to our little lessons. Here we saw an attempt to unbalance the position by seeking to exchange a bishop here was a brilliant way of weakening an entire colour complex, this time on the queen side, with the move, a4. And again, the attack itself, seeking to dominate the dark squares on the king side. And eventually dominating these light squares which had become seriously weak. So thank you very much for your time. I hope you enjoyed that game. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I'm very grateful to you and the Grandmasters for putting that up. So take care. I wish you well with your chess. Regards, Robbie.